You're tuned into DecayMag podcast, online source for horror, thriller and sci-fi entertainment news.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to DecayMag Horror Entertainment News Podcast. We are on our 9th season, and this is episode 3. Now, every season we have a batch of 13 episodes, and after that we go on to the next season. This is episode 3, season 9, and once we hit 13, we go into season 10. And in this episode, we have exclusive interviews with filmmaker Colin Costello. We'll be discussing his award-winning short film, After Party. Next, we will have an exclusive interview with Shiva and Duckie Rodriguez. Duckie Rodriguez is a producer, writer, actor, and Shiva is a filmmaker, writer, director. They are well known in the indie horror scene with films such as Father of Lies Short 2018, The Family Way Coming Home 2017, and Predatory Moon 2017. These are credits off of IMDb. And we'll be concluding our exclusive interview segment with an interview with Nicole Stang. We'll be discussing her award-winning film, The Whistler. And also, this final interview also kicks off our feature segment on the website titled Cineastas de Terror, or Filmmakers of Horror, Filmmakers of Terror. This is a spotlight platform in which we'll give special attention to the Latino community of filmmakers in horror, thriller, and science fiction, both on the indie scene and mainstream media. Of course, we all have to shed some light on the diversity of this very extraordinary genre, and we'll be spotlighting actors, writers, producers from the Latino community, and hopefully gain some insight or put up a spotlight so we could shine these new ideas and emerging talents. In any event, we have some interesting movie news on My Best Friend's Exorcism, The Boy 2, Snowflake, which all 3 of these films are from the independent circuit, as well as trailer reviews from Leprechaun, The Intruder, Life Changer, and the upcoming Netflix film. Without further ado, here is Season 9, Episode 3. Once again, you could find DecayMag podcast on Spotify, Google Music, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We also be providing the audio portion on YouTube. For those who find YouTube more convenient, we have timestamps, and you could jump into any particular topic that you want to specifically hear.
Segment 1, Movie News. My Best Friend's Exorcism. Film adaptation.
According to The Hollywood Reporter, the novel titled My Best Friend's Exorcism is full steam ahead into a feature production film adaptation. Grady Hendrix has a slate of other novels that are being converted to a visual narrative, whether it be film or series. His book titled Horror Star, which is set against a haunted IKEA store backdrop, is being developed as a series, while his other novel, Satanic Panic, is being developed as a film and that will star actress Rebecca Romijn and Jerry O'Connell. Behind that project is Fangoria and Aperture Entertainment. Hendrix also has another novel soon to be released titled We Sold Our Souls. And now for the topic at hand, My Best Friend's Exorcism, which got picked up by Endeavor Content. Christopher Landon, the writer and director of the now successful Happy Death Day franchise. Well, Happy Death Day has a sequel, but I predict it would be expanded into a franchise. That's my prediction. In any event, he is on the project to My Best Friend's Exorcism. Now, I am unfamiliar with this novel or any of Hendrix's works. Here is a synopsis for that novel. My Best Friend's Exorcism. The story is set in 1988. It follows the relationship of two best friends, Abby and Gretchen. After an evening of skinny dipping goes disastrously wrong, Gretchen begins to act more and more different as Abby slowly comes to believe her friend has become demonically possessed. Both girls must soon face a tough question. Is their friendship strong enough to beat the devil? This is an interesting concept, and according to The Hollywood Reporter, My Best Friend's Exorcism blends teen sisterhood and horror. Seems to be a coming-of-age story. Interesting concept right there. And we see more and more films, such as Summer of '88, and also Netflix Stranger Days. Those go back into the retro era of the 1980s. And I'm seeing a trend here. Filmmakers are jumping back in time to explore the yesteryear era, the 1980s, the 1970s, and bringing a modern spin on that idea. I'm looking forward to My Best Friend's Exorcism. It sounds interesting, sounds unique, and I always applaud when especially big name production houses, seek out new ideas, especially when it comes to novels and adaptations of novels as a series or, in this case, a film. However, on the flip side of that coin, I hope that the film adaptation really parallels the written form. We all know, we have seen films that are based on novels that stray away from either the storyline or the character arc is altered to fit adequately into a 90-minute production. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's always good to pick up the book nevertheless. In this case, My Best Friend's Exorcism, we shall wait and see for the upcoming trailer, which will give us an idea, the feel behind the film, the cinematography, and of course, most importantly, the acting, special effects, creature effects, if they opt for practical effects over CGI. Stay tuned to DK Mag. We'll be on this topic, providing trailer first impressions and hopefully some reveal stills on the production.
The Boytocast developments.
More horror news has emerged from the American film market, AFM. An exhibition of indie and mainstream productions that are shopped for potential sales at this Santa Monica, California event. STX Films and Lakeshore Entertainment announced the sequel to the much successful film The Boy has sold out for all international markets. The Boy released in 2016, but this sequel stars Katie Holmes as the lead character, Lisa. Christopher Convery will co-star as her son, Jude. The film is written by Stacey Minier, and Minier also penned the first installment to what may potentially be a new horror film franchise. The Boy 2. Here's the overview of this upcoming film. Unaware of the terrifying history of the Hillshire Mansion, a young family moves into the estate where their young son soon makes an unsettling new friend, an eerily lifelike doll he calls Brahms. No further information on STX Film and Lakeshore Entertainment's upcoming horror film, The Boy 2. Aside from production, principal photography that would begin in Victoria, British Columbia on the 14th of January 2019. Once again, this is when they'll start filming, not the release date of the film, which most likely will be in the 2020, or perhaps if they speed up production, by the end of 2019. But let's see. Once again, principal photography will begin in Victoria, British Columbia on the 14th of January 2019. Now, what are my thoughts on The Boy? Love it. Some in the horror community loved it, some hated it. It's an interesting psychological horror in which, if anyone has seen the first installment, revolves around this lifelike doll of a child. And once again, horror filmmakers use the innocence of a child or something as trivial as a doll to convey horror. And in this case, it could be a supernatural predicament or a psychological drama that the protagonist has to figure out if he or she is dealing with is real, being a phantasma or a paranormal event, or is this character going insane? That is a well-crafted storyline to weave for audiences. Some may not like that approach, some do. I particularly found the first installment of The Boy to be quite interesting. It didn't garner enough scares for me, but I wasn't expecting that at all, considering it's a psychological horror slash thriller, let's say. I'm looking forward to The Boy 2 once it releases. Looking forward to the trailer to see how the ambience of this production is, as well as some production stills. Not much can be said about supernatural entities. Here we are dealing with a doll, and if for those who have seen the first part, there was nothing much supernatural about that. And Katie Holmes and actor Christopher Convery are in this sequel to The Boy, which entices overall the aspect of the film, meaning Katie Holmes is an established actress, and Christopher Convery, at just 10 years old, has so many IMDb credits. Fantastic. It always intrigues me when child actors are put into the mix of a horror or psychological horror / thriller script. Very fascinating, and we've seen that so many times in horror cinema. Yeah, stay tuned to DK Mag. We'll be providing some updates on The Boy 2.
German fantasy horror Snowflake release date.
Closing out our movie news is the release date for the German fantasy horror Leprechaun, translated Snowflake. The film has an interesting premise. Here is the synopsis. Hunting down the murderer of their families in an archaic near-future Berlin, two outlaws find themselves trapped in a wicked fairy tale of a mysterious screenplay that entangles them in a vicious circle of revenge, apparently all written by a clueless dentist. In their quest for vengeance, they must contend with a myriad of wicked fairy tale assassins, madmen, a blood-covered angel, and an electric-powered superhero. Wow, that is intriguing. The director for Leprechaun, aka Snowflake, is Adolfo J. Plummer and William James. The film is written by Arend Remmers. Snowflake will be available on Blu-ray, DVD, VOD on the 4th of December, and the Blu-ray will be $19.99, the DVD $14.99, and the film has a running time of 120 minutes, German with English subtitles. To do, stop by and visit our podcast notes, where we will be providing key art and stills for Snowflake. Also, we'll be providing a film review for Snowflake, so do stay tuned. That would all be on our website, DecayMag.com. For this segment, I would say I am intrigued to review this film. This is an original sounding script. It has everything you would need in a fantasy and horror. You have vengeance, you have weird entities, you have two protagonists on a mission, and so many external conflicts coming at them that I want to see how are they going to develop from the opening act, because as the synopsis describes, they are outlaws, meaning they're bad guys. So would we see these characters change by Act 3, given that they have to be in conflict with so many of these much more evil presence in their world? Interesting. And once again, we have innovative content coming from the overseas market. In this case, it's Germany. My question is always, where is Hollywood with these original ideas? So far, we haven't seen anything original in the past, 10, 15 years? Films sprinkle here and there, but I wouldn't define those films as innovation or innovative. We need a franchise. We need fresh ideas, such as this. Something that combines horror, fantasy, and action. In any event, as I stated, we'll be providing the film stills, the production stills, and our podcast notes, and our upcoming film review of Snowflake would be on our website. Do check it out.
Segment 2. Exclusive interviews. Colin Costello. Director. Writer. The After Party.
You're open late, Lloyd.
Late for some. Early for others.
Kicking off our exclusive interview segment is our conversation with writer, producer, director Colin Costello. We will be discussing Costello's film career as well as his award-winning horror short titled After Party, which received nominations at the Nightmare Film Festival for Best Writing in a Short, winner of Best Thriller Short, and nominee of Socially Conscious Narrative at the Women in Horror Film Festival. And this first interview kicks off our slate of interviews focusing on award winners and or nominees at the 2018 Women in Horror Film Festival. The After Party. Here's the synopsis. A social media queen stops for one last drink at a dive bar where she meets 4 mysterious women. Interesting concept. In any event, here is my conversational interview with director, writer, the horror short, The After Party, Mr. Colin Costello. Thank you for joining me in this exclusive interview, Mr. Costello, and discussing your film, which is currently in film festival circulation and it has garnered a prestigious award last month, October, at the Women in Horror Film Festival. And happy Monday, by the way.
Oh, happy Monday to you too. And this is great. Yeah, we were really thrilled to win Best Thriller at Women in Horror, and we really we just also won Best Horror Film at Oregon Scream Week.
And the film festival is just beginning. I believe you're gonna have to buy a bookcase to fill them up with these awards.
I hope so. I mean, to be honest, the After Party's been a bit of a challenge to program in the festivals, I think, in part due to its length, because it was, many film festivals want 10 minutes or less, and the After Party is almost 18 minutes, and it makes it harder to program from what I gather and everything. But unfortunately, it was never designed to be 10 minutes long.
That's an interesting concept. Thank you for that informational tidbit, because at this moment I'm writing a short film myself, and I'm at the cusp. Do I make it 10 minutes or do I add a few more minutes longer just to add a little bit more footage?
Well, the story, I have 2 answers for that. The storyteller in me says, you have to tell your story, but the fact of the matter is, if you're spending, $40, $50, sometimes, $90 or $100 to enter your film in the festivals, you want that investment to hopefully pay off. And yeah, the easier way is to make sure it's 10 minutes, around 10 minutes, and that's including the credits.
Mental note. Thank you for that information.
Yeah, for sure.
To kick off the interview, officially kick off the interview, a little bit of an origin story, some information about yourself, your career in the performing arts, and leading up to the After Party.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been a writer all my life, ever since I was 5 years old, and I've always loved movies. My dad always took the time out to take me to the movies when I was a kid. And I always just viewed them really differently. I always, I enjoyed them, but I also wondered, well, how did they do that? How did they accomplish that scene? How did they make the TIE fighters fly in Star Wars and things like that? And I was always fascinated with film and storytelling, and ended up actually majoring in advertising after I flunked out of college my first year as a chemical engineer. I majored in advertising, which is a storytelling, in and of itself, which is doing a story for a brand instead. And but the film love never left me, and I wanted to start writing screenplays again. And I started writing screenplays, and I did well in screenplay contests, got close to making a couple of features. And then in 2012, I was hired to write a family film called The Stream with Ray Wilson that ended up starring Ray Wilson. And it was something I could relate to, kids in the woods playing Star Wars. So, I went from there and had a couple of other features, and then started making short films because I wanted to start storytelling. And also, these days, if you want to prove yourself as a writer, it's actually better if you can have something visual for people to watch. People don't really want to sit back and just read a screenplay anymore. So that was the reason that we did this fan film in 2015 called Committed, which is about the Joker and Harley Quinn and couples therapy, just because I really wanted to show that I could write superhero genre, and the actress in it and the producer, Brandy Price, wanted to prove that, she could act in superhero. She's a fantastic actress. And that went on to win a bunch of awards and do really well in the festival circuit for 3 years. And then came the after party. I wanted to try my hand at directing one of my own scripts. And I found Rachel Amanda Bryant. She became my producing partner, and she's the lead actress in it. And we just ended up doing the film.
That is quite interesting. Some pointers there that I wasn't aware of, especially the point on creating a visual narrative to emphasize your strength in writing.
Well, I think it's important just because, there's so much competition. The studios really aren't doing indie films. TV right now seems to be the landscape that people are really moving towards. So how do you prove yourself besides just writing a script? And if you have the capabilities to raise the money, which, we did a few times, and, prove yourself and do a film, it's easier for someone to watch it, rather than just, have to go through 90 pages of a screenplay. And plus, I just heard anyway, when readers are reading your screenplay, they read the first 10 pages, the middle 5 pages, and then the last 5 pages to determine if they want to read the screenplay at all.
Yeah, I could see that point of view, because they want to feel how Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, the overall tone of each part.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think what I find also with short film storytelling, on the positive side, you can tell a story in a very succinct way. But also, it's still important to have, a first act, an inciting incident, second act, third act, a low point. You still need those elements, I feel like, in a successful short film, a goal,
I see that there is a popularity with short films because right now in this era, we're in the instant gratification era.
Absolutely, 100%.
Full-length films are not what they used to be. And it's more of a challenge to create a short film because you have a short time frame to craft the character.
100%. And the thing is that I think I was able to gravitate towards short films pretty quickly because essentially coming out of the advertising world, we have to tell stories in 30 or 60 seconds. So that made it, I feel like if I have a cap on the amount of pages I have to write, I actually do better.
So basically,
because I know that there's a constraint.
Right.
I know there's a wall that we're going to hit.
Right. So from the advertising aspect, the short film would be an elaborate pitch.
Yeah, exactly. It would be long form content.
And for the after party, I'm really intrigued with the film noir visuals that you have applied. Was there
Thanks.
a reason why you chose to go that route?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of The Twilight Zone and Night Gallery and The Outer Limits. Those are all shows I grew up watching when I was a kid. And even every New Year's Eve, my daughter Chloe and I, our tradition is we sit down and we watch the Twilight Zone marathon on Sci-Fi. You can watch the Twilight Zone all year, but at the end of the day, we don't watch it all year. We sit down and always watch it New Year's Eve. And also Black Mirror, I love. And the thing was I knew we were making a Twilight Zone episode. That when I told the cast and crew on the first day of shooting, welcome and, gave them the inspirational speech, I told them, remember, we are making a Twilight Zone episode with, current contemporary dialogue and contemporary issues. But I really wanted to give it that Rod Serling feel. I mean, to me, the only thing that's missing from the after party is Rod Serling doing an intro. So, and, I wanted to stay true to that genre.
When I first saw the film on the first run, I said to myself, I heard years back that creating a film noir aesthetic cuts down on the cost. Let's say if you're light painting and the light doesn't come out a certain way, it would come out much better on black and white. And I thought to myself, that's probably why one of the reasons why you chose.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, we set out. We had, when the DP Brooke Willard and I had originally talked about even shooting, black and white film. We actually shot on a red and in color, but we lit for black and white. We used wardrobe that we knew would work well with black and white. If you look at it in color, it's a really different feel to the film.
It's different and it really stands out from the pack.
Thank you.
I can relate to the parallel that you just gave with the Outer Limits and the Twilight Zone. I feel nostalgic in that era. That I wish we had programming like that now.
Well, I think Black Mirror comes really close to it in a way, but those themes of the Twilight Zone, there's a reason why you can watch today and still relate to it. The themes are universal and timeless for a lot of, you talk about greed, you talk about jealousy, murder. These are all themes that, are consistent. How you kind of craft it together now.
Right. And that brings us to the themes that you have infused into the script and into your characters. We did touch on social media and jealousy and redemption and ultimately a payback for actions committed in the life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at Instagram, you look at Facebook. I mean, Snapchat. I have all of those too. I actually didn't start using Snapchat until I married my wife, which that's how she communicates. But we spend so much time now as voyeurs rather than going out and doing something. We're watching influencers walk down the street or what they're eating, and our lives are spent like following other people that we don't even know. They do influence what decision you make ultimately, and to me it's kind of a waste of time, even though I'm addicted just like everyone else, but it becomes just that kind of an addiction. And when I was growing up, even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we it wasn't like this, you know. Like I remember still times without a cell phone
Right.
and stuff. And not to sound like you know, grumpy old man or anything, but it's just, you know, I mean, it's definitely changed it, but I think it does. It can affect you. I mean, you look at, you know, there was a thing a few years ago on Facebook where this woman catfished this 16-year-old girl and basically had her commit suicide.
Right, right.
You know, because you don't really know the person that is on behind that smiling picture and everything. You were only seeing a slice of that person.
That is so true.
So I thought it was just important to kind of address it because, you know, girls over-index on cell phone usage and social media, and you know, my daughter's included, and it's just kind of like, you know, there's more to life than just following other people.
Absolutely. And that's the dark side of social media. We have the benefits, of course, especially for the performing arts.
Of course. I mean, everything has a benefit. A gun has a benefit. But I mean, there's a dark side to all this, and you know, the world is filled with different personalities and different emotionally challenged people, and they get involved, and you don't know the reactions that's going to happen. There, you know, some people can be really heavily influenced.
What a coincidence, because the last interview that I had last week, we delved on this conversation, this topic, and I say, with social media, you would figure people are closer together. It's the opposite. People are more further apart.
Oh, I think it's really polarized us a lot.
Yes, and that's tragic in a way. I think there's more solitude now than it was before.
Well, and I mean, look, today's election day, and even if you're on the same side per se, it's like, okay, everyone's now posting, I voted. I chose not to post that I voted. I just went and voted because I feel like, again, social media, okay, now there's this pressure that you have to go vote early. You know, it doesn't matter whether you voted early or vote today, it's still the same vote. But social media now, it's like this pressure thing. I voted, and the inference is, have you voted yet? So there becomes almost like, you know, this class pressure, you know.
Mm-hmm. In a way, it resembles the queen bee and the worker bees. We are drones in a way, slaves to social media.
Absolutely, and you know, and I'm not. Look, I use social media just like anyone else. I have a bunch of different accounts, and I think, like you said, there are a lot of great benefits to it. But you know, I also see just a little bit of a darker side. You know, a lot of the hate groups that have been coming to fruition the last couple of years. They use social media to communicate. You know, it can go both ways, and it really depends on who the user is.
With the protagonist in the film, the After Party, how was it to come up with this idea for this tortured soul and put her in this interesting predicament?
Well, Sky is a culmination of, like I said, a lot of different influencers I've watched on, you know, Instagram with their Instagram stories and Snapchat stories. And she's an amalgamation of all of them. And, you know, it's just like, watch me. But it's like, what are you watching? Or are you even watching yourself? Do you know how you're really coming across? So that was really Sky's thing. Sky is very unaware of herself. Even though she's very aware, she's also really unaware of the power and the influence that she really does have. To me, the real protagonist in the film is Liv, who's played by Hilary Barriford. She's actually, to me, the actual protagonist, which is why I have her go to the end, because she looks similar to Sky, but she's almost the opposite of Sky. And she, is the real victim here at the end, having her mom killed and everything through a series of events that were caused by Sky.
Interesting. From my interpretation, the other women in the room were the metaphorical guilty conscience and plaguing the mind of someone who's always self-centered and has no care of others.
See, that's I'll take that too. Absolutely, 100%. But just on a literal basis, on a surface level, Liv is actually the protag, and they're all victims to a certain extent. Except, of course, for the bartender.
Right.
He rather enjoys it.
How long did it take to compose this short film from script to screen?
I originally wrote the short back in 2012. It was actually, and it wasn't a social commentary thing. It was more a commentary, and there's still a little bit of that theme in there. It's more of a commentary about women and drinking and binge drinking. And it eventually evolved into the social media commentary. But yeah, it was written in 2012, and then we decided we were going to make it in 2016, raised money in 2017 over Seed and Spark, and we're lucky enough to surpass our goal. And we shot in 2017 and finished it up in the fall of 2017.
Wow. And I'm also impressed that you have opted to use crowdfunding solutions to fund the film. Most filmmakers I've spoken to are still wary of using that service.
It's my advertising background. I've crowdfunded 4 times, and I actually consult on it as well. But I failed miserably my first time, and then I went back and thought and studied what we did wrong. And what I realized was, and through no fault of any other filmmaker, but because I did the same thing, you immediately go to Kickstarter and think you're going to raise a ton of money. But the question you have to ask yourself is, why does anyone want to give you $1 to go make your movie? And the answer isn't, it's a great story. They could care less. There's a gazillion great stories on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and Seed and Spark. You have to find that other element. You're really starting to sell your movie right then and there when you start crowdfunding. And you have to give it some sort of an angle, some sort of a meaning for the audience.
Mm-hmm. And that is so true, and that's one thing I always emphasize. There's a parallel for any filmmaker in the horror genre or any genre. It's art, and it's also a product that you have to market.
It is a product you have to market. It's the entertainment industry. You're not just, if you're trying to make a film to go on the festival circuit or be a calling card for you, it's a brand. You're a brand, whether you're a director, writer, or actor, and this is a product from your brand. It's no different than Nike coming out with a new shoe or Apple with a new phone. It's a part of your brand. And how are you going to market that brand? What are you trying to say? What's your voice? What's the meaning? Why should anyone care about it? Because people should think of it, they're crowdfunding, like they're going to a multiplex and they have a choice of, 10 or 15 different movies. What makes you choose one movie or another?
And it all ultimately comes down to the poster art, the trailers, and so on and so forth. Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
And just how back a few years back, persons will go to Barnes and Noble and gravitate to the book cover that has an elaborate design on it.
Right. Well, when things didn't cost so much, say when I'm a huge Prince fan, I would automatically just go buy a Prince album without even hearing it, because I know I'm going to like something on there. I know I'm going to like, I'll still gravitate toward a Spielberg film, or, you know, there's certain names that you'll go see, but when you're an indie filmmaker, you don't have those assets. It's even harder. So you have to make sure in your marketing, from the point of crowdfunding all the way through, you know, when you're trying to get your film on the festival circuit, that you're speaking a language that people are going to care about.
Interesting point. I hope our listeners, when this comes out, really take note. There's so many intricacies that gets involved with creating a film. It's mind-boggling, and especially with social media. We have free platforms right now just to advertise film. Let's just hope it stays that way. So those are so many facets to utilize.
Well, yeah, and social media is huge now. When it comes to casting, we cast our film. One of the criteria was, well, how big is your social media following? Because we wanted to be able to tap into that person's fan base and hopefully get a contribution. So, I mean, and yeah, we have to use the, you know, we have an after party Twitter, we have an after party Facebook page. You know, I have two personal Facebook pages, my personal and my, you know, screenwriter Colin. So, I mean, yeah, social media is extremely important. That's one of the good sides of social media. It is free advertising.
Yeah, as I said, I hope it stays that way, especially with all the regulations that may come about in the years to come.
Yeah, for sure.
Directing, what were some of the key points that you have picked up and learned, or obstacles that you have overcome with this first entry in behind the camera?
Well, one was I was scared out of my mind doing it. I surrounded myself with, you know, my friends who also happen to be very talented individuals. You know, Blake Vaz, who I helped his horror film Bloodstain. He was my first AD, and you know, there were times I was falling back into just being a writer and paying attention to that rather than paying attention to a director's responsibilities. And my first AD had to remind me, you're the director, yet people are looking to you. And I was just like, oh my God, because I've never been in that role before as a film director. So it was really important to keep that hat on and not fall back into writer hat.
Mm-hmm. That's perfectly understandable.
That was a challenge. You know, the other challenge is, you know, I'm a producer on the film, and it's switching those hats. It's going from the director hat, well, this is the vision, to the producer hat. Well, we can't afford that part of the vision. You know, how do we accomplish it? You know, so it was a lot of hat switching, and yeah. People ask if I enjoyed directing. I think I did. I have a second short film out that I feel a little bit more comfortable with, called Dream Wisher, that I'm a little bit more comfortable with directing now. But I think at the end of the day, I'm still a writer. I'm a writer at heart. I love the purity of writing, because nobody else is involved unless you have a co-writer. It's pure. It's just a story that you have managed to put on the paper, and whether it's good or bad, it's still just your story. No one else is involved yet. No one else is critiquing it. And of course, you're going to have to get other people involved. But there's a real satisfying feeling that I still get writing and finishing a story versus, you know, saying, okay, that's a wrap. We have wrapped this film, but you know, still you wrap the film, but you don't know exactly what you've got until you get into the edit room. You know what you've gotten when you've written something. You know what's on every page. But,
right.
You know, with the film, you think you've got the shots. You hope you've gotten the shots, but you don't know until your editor really starts putting it together. So there's still a little uneasiness for me. Like, it's uneasy and it's exciting at the same time, that we're finished, that we, created and shot something, but, did we get it all? Did we get everything we need to tell the story?
Right. And that's where the problem comes in, that you would have to create more shots, get everybody together, because once it's off the editing floor, no, something's missing and something's not right, and that could really complicate matters with the production.
There's still question marks over until you're sitting in the edit room, and even when you're sitting in the edit room, it's such a different feeling than when you were just shooting it. You're sitting in this dark room for hours and hours, where, when you're still writing the screenplay, you're just sitting, at your desk or table or in a coffee shop surrounded by people. It's a calmer experience.
Yes, I do know. I really relate to that, because as a writer myself, I see myself always visioning these scenes and so on and so forth. But it's a totally different entity once you start putting it to film.
Well, absolutely. And, there's 3 screenplays. There's the one you write, the one you shoot, and then the one you edit. And really, I feel like, because I have shot a lot, especially commercials and the other short films, but not directing them, obviously. But, you're just kind of hoping you're getting enough of these scenes together that your editor can really put together a decent film,
Mm-hmm. That is so. Also, I'm curious. When you write the screenplay and you're putting it up to film, did you use a storyboard?
I did storyboard. Yeah, I storyboarded it out. Yeah, we actually, we had a storyboard artist for crowdfunding create key frames from the film so we could show that. But and then when we finally were getting to shooting, I did it was a horrendous looking shooting board of chicken scratch, but yeah, there was the shooting board and a shot list.
That's one area in filmmaking that I still find is like, wow, we still have storyboard. You would figure after all this technology that something else would be used in its place.
Well, for me, I think it's like when I start writing a screenplay, I like to I don't sit at a laptop. I have a notepad and I'm scribbling down and crossing out scenes. I find it very cathartic to really, just scribble and write with a pencil. I like that with the filming as well. I like to visualize it. I have this visual in my head, and I like to just scribble it down, on paper and everything before we go shoot it.
For the closing out the interview, a couple of questions. One being, I like to infuse an inspirational aspect to all our interviews. So from your point of view and from your expanding career in the performing arts filmmaking, what advice do you have for those out there who really want to jump into the platform of horror cinema or filmmaking?
Really research. Really research the genre that you want to do. Know the rules of the genre, either from a writing standpoint and from a filming standpoint. Know there's certain shots that you'll do in a horror film that tell the audience it's a horror film versus, versus a drama. So I would say know the rules. Really research it. Know and love the genre that you're going to do. And also from a writer standpoint, make sure you're saying something. Like, your film isn't just about your film. It's like, what's the real story? And this was something I didn't even really think about, which sounds almost asinine when I was starting to write. I was just like, oh, I'm not really saying any. I would always just say, oh, I'm just doing a comedy. I'm just doing this. But, as I've gotten older and evolved more as a writer and hopefully now as a director, I really want to say things. I think that there's a lot to comment about on society and I have something to say about it.
Yeah, Yeah, and in my opinion, horror cinema is a great platform for social commentary across the board.
Oh, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it lets you say that and sci-fi allow you to say something without hammering it over somebody's head or becoming too preachy.
Precisely, because the use of metaphors, whether it be symbolic or metaphor or person, it really translates the message, and subtly and also subconsciously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to close out our interview, any future projects that you have in the works, and also feel free to inject your personal or business social media handles.
Yeah, for sure. Well, like I said, I have a second Twilight Zone type film, nowhere near as dark as The After Party, on the just starting out on the fest circuit, called Dream Wisher. And Sam, who ran Women in Horror, who now runs the PA Indie Shorts, they just accepted Dream Wisher into their festival. So I'm really grateful for her. Working on a couple of scripts, and still working on The After Party, tweaking here and tweaking there. And there's a couple things in the hopper I'm thinking about. And Twitter-wise, Colin Costello 10, and on Facebook, Screenwriter Colin. And same on Instagram, Screenwriter Colin. I should probably consolidate it all to Screenwriter Colin.
Yeah, it's quite difficult, especially when the name is somewhat common. You have to put a number or something to differentiate yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Just got married a couple months ago, so working with my new wife.
Hey, congratulations to you.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Which we met over Instagram.
That's great. Congrats to you, and congrats to the success of the After Party, and much congratulations to your career. You're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you for this interview opportunity.
Thanks. Really appreciate it. No, I really appreciate it.
Segment 2. Exclusive interviews. Director. Writer. Shiva Rodriguez and Actor. Director, Writer. Duckie Rodriguez.
Our exclusive interview segment continues with a double interview featuring writer, director, and special effects artist Shiva Rodriguez. Shiva Rodriguez is a veteran in the indie horror film circuit. She possesses over 25 special effects film credits and 9 writing credits and 6 directorial credits that include short and full feature-length films. Joining her in this interview is Duckie Rodriguez, actor, director, and writer. Duckie Rodriguez possesses over 10 acting credits, with writing credits 7 and 5 directorial credits that include short films and full feature-length films. Our interview, our conversational interview, will delve into the various aspects of indie horror filmmaking, whether it be gaining experience to improve your craft, to script writing and the complexities involved in crafting a good story arc and plot. Without further ado, here is my interview with Shiva Rodriguez and Duckie Rodriguez. And I like to start off the interview by providing a platform and origin story for you both. Ladies first, of course, and how you got your start in creating film and entering in the horror genre in general.
Well, I've always been a fan of horror movies, even as a little kid. And I'd say about 11 years ago, I started doing writing for a screenplay. then it just didn't seem right, so I handed it over to, Duckie and asked him to take a look at it. And then he had a million good ideas for it, and that's how we ended up screenwriting together. Then a few years later, we got kind of talked into, working on films. I started out as a special effects artist, and Duckie's been, an actor and stunt choreographer and helps out with the effects and does a lot of the builds. And I guess, about 4 years ago, I got dragged into directing. I'm probably the only person I know who didn't want to be a director, and I kind of, got dragged into it and found out that I enjoyed it. So Duckie and I have been writing together and then producing, a lot of our work together ever since.
Yeah, I worked with her. I long ago discovered that I was really terrible at acting, so I got out of that and I became a director, and I was really good at directing on stage. I thought I was going to do the same thing in film, and it turns out that I'm terrible at directing in film. So I've gone back to being an actor, and I sit here and support Shiva, who is a fantastic director, and it turns out that we really, really complement one another when it comes to writing. So that's pretty much how our story goes.
Yeah, I did check up on your IMDb, Duckie. You have 14 credits in acting, and you jump back and forth with that and directing with 5 credits.
Oh, yeah. The directing was awful. Yeah.
Oh, let's not talk about my first time.
Oh, we are going to jump into that, Shiva. As a matter of fact, what were the lessons learned when you first started as directing?
Don't take on a feature as your first time directing. That's what I learned. Yeah, it was actually funny. I'd written this werewolf story, and it was the only time that I had written something solo without Duckie's input. And we were talking about producing it, and everybody kind of looked at me and said, "Hey, this film has a lot of effects. You know effects. You should direct it." And I really wasn't prepared because I'd never thought about directing before, so I don't think like a director at the time. So, that was my film school. And I took the advanced course, apparently, by doing a werewolf movie feature as my first time directing.
Wow. That is ambitious.
Now, I prefer to call it stupid.
Well, as they say, through failure comes the lessons.
Yeah, we came up with a couple of lessons for that one.
How'd you get involved with it?
I actually had nothing to do with that one. I was kind of staying out of the business for a while. I'd gotten out of directing. And I kind of knew that wasn't the direction for me. I only helped her out with effects every now and then. But Shiva ended up losing one of her lead actors for that film, and I had not even read the script at all. But 2 days before they were going to start shooting, she loses the lead, and I just read the script and said, okay, if you can't find anybody, like she's going to find anybody in 2 days, agreed to go ahead and jump in there. And it turns out that my years of directing on stage had actually improved my acting a little bit. So that was okay, I guess. But that also came as kind of a shock to the rest of the team, since I had nothing to do with this when it began. And then Shiva was all embarrassed because she was going to have to turn to them and say, oh, yeah, we lost our lead, but I've got my husband here, and he's sure to help out.
That comes across the board in filmmaking, not just for horror, but across the board. Anything could happen during production that could sidetrack the whole project.
Oh, gosh, no lie. I'm so glad that we started out as writers, because the number of times we've taken on projects where we've just had to rewrite entire stories for the sake of making them work due to these little foul-ups, I guess you could call them.
Little upsies.
Little upsies. And I think that's a really, really great strength for us, is just the fact that we started out with the writing, and our writing has worked out pretty well.
That leads us to the next question for Shiva. as a writer, what are the most important aspects of composing a very good horror screenplay?
I usually start with what I know and kind of go out from there. And a lot of my inspirations, they come out of left field sometimes. The feature that we're trying desperately to get funded is called The Family Way. And that one, it started with a question. I'd been watching Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses, and I wanted to know where the Otis character came from. Because you had this whole family full of maniacs and then this one stray guy who wasn't related. So I started thinking about that and coming up with how a complete stranger might enter into a family like that and not be like, the next victim. And kind of drew from that as a basis of a horror story. With the script that Duckie and I wrote called The Haunt, which was in the Women in Horror Film Festival this year, that one was based on just I guess you call it a superstition that's prominent among haunt workers. And, how they think that their attractions can be more scary. So when you get the seed of an idea and then you just start developing it and you play on, some of the common themes are like isolation, madness, things like that. It's just a matter of deciding which direction a story needs to go in based on, your characters and where you have it taking place, and kind of goes from there. So it's really hard for me to really lay down a formula as much as just coming up with a good story and then just letting it, a lot of the times it writes itself once you get started.
Right. That is so true. And what I find most for screenwriters is that they get overambitious, especially with the short film. They want a space shuttle flying on this and that, and of course budget doesn't allow it, so it's unrealistic. So in a way, to craft a screenplay would have to be within their means in the budget wise.
Oh, I'm terrible with that. The short film that we have right now going, in the festival is called Father of Lies. That one, half the story takes place in, Asgard in Norse mythology. And I have been criticized with trying to play, Game of Thrones or something with it and been compared to it as a really, really low-budget Game of Thrones. And when I had written the story, I wasn't thinking about, can I really make, Central Florida look like Asgard? I was thinking more along the lines of the story that I wanted to tell and working with whatever I had available, which some people think I pulled it off, other people don't. So I'm horrible when it comes to writing for a budget.
Duckie, when the scripts fall on your lap and you absorb the context of it, what are some of the things that really jump out to you, especially with the character story arc?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because that tends to be a direction that I lean more towards. Shiva is, don't get me wrong, she gets some of the best characters I have ever seen. But her main strengths lie in just how organized she is. In every script that I see, everything is plotted out so specifically. Every character, we know exactly where they're at. We know exactly what they know and what they don't know. So when she drops it onto my lap, the work in characters is so incredibly easy, because all I have to do is I look at it from an actor's point of view and see, what do you want as an actor? You want a character that is going to be able to express themselves. You want a character that is going to have a lot of different emotional peaks. You want a character that actually grows from one moment to the next. It's not just a matter of finding your lead protagonist and having them grow from the beginning to the end, which is a standard thing. You want every character to grow somehow. And that's just a joy for me, because I just put myself in a position of each character. If I were an actor, what would I want to see this character do?
Right.
And it turns out to be extremely fun when I do that. It's a great follow-up. We really do mesh well on this kind of thing. That's
great. When you have not just the personal, but also the professional support when you enter a project, whether it be the screenwriting phase or the film production phase. it's always good to have someone there to help you out or get you out the hole in some creative way.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like every single person in a production has some sort of creative input. This is something a lot of folks don't recognize. The actors, the people who set up the lights, the people who set up the cameras, the people who set up the set dressing, they all have that creative input, and you have to think about that when you're writing, because we've seen writers that will write a novel and call it a screenplay, and that doesn't do the job. We have to put in the elements that these other extremely important production crew have to deal with and give them something that they're going to be excited about taking and flying with it.
Shiva, from your perspective, we met at the Women in Horror Film Festival this year, and
woohoo!
Yeah. What is your outlook on the current landscape of women in horror, and what do you want to see change in the near future?
Oh, it's so difficult. I mean, I just came back from doing another festival where they had all the filmmakers line up, and I was one. Yeah, I think there was like 20 filmmakers up there, and I was one of 3 women. So the math is really, really off when it comes to filmmakers in general, not just in horror. I hear that in horror it's worse, that there aren't as many women, but considering that, statistically speaking, women enjoy horror movies, if not more, than male audiences from, just attendance in these films. So it surprises me that not as many female directors would actually work in horror. And so I'm not sure exactly what the ratio is or the numbers are for that. But I would like to see, I'd like to see more women, tell their stories, because they do tell stories in a different perspective, and be able to overcome the, obstacles that you will get in this very male-dominated field. I've been fortunate by having a lot of really supportive guys who like my stories, but I understand that I'm not in the majority when it comes to women trying to get into this line of work.
That's interesting. And Duckie, from your perspective, what changes have you seen on the professional scope with women's contribution to horror?
I've noticed that you've got a degree of quality there that is much higher than what you would expect anywhere else. I think that when it comes to the people who have been doing horror, especially on the independent circuit, they've kind of gotten a little bit lazy. On a very personal note, when I work with Shiva, Shiva knows and understands all of the tropes and the reasons why they exist, which is funny because a lot of people look at horror as like the cheap knockoff filmmaking, and yet it has the most explored tropes. Every last little thing that you see in a horror movie that you've seen 1,000 times before exists because somebody thought it out. The woman getting murdered in the shower is meant to convey this sense of vulnerability. The fact that you have some character who everybody hates is going to die in the most horrible method is something that draws upon the audience to make them feel good about themselves, to see the bully get beaten up. The children surviving till the end of the film is this sense of hope that gives people. Film. However, again, even the opposite has become true as another trope where the children becomes the monster, or the children does become an early victim in order to jar the audience. All these things are really, really well thought out. And when I see people looking down upon it, including many filmmakers themselves, simply because it is such an easy genre to get into, I see women like Shiva who actually appreciate these tropes more and utilize them better. And I think I think if more people actually paid attention to what was going on, they'd realize you've got some incredibly wonderful product coming out from women filmmakers who just pay attention is all.
Right. You bring up a good point. In my opinion, I think the horror genre, in comparison to action or comedy, presents a stage to really convey social commentary. That's been going on since the beginning with the black and white era up until now.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's simply because of the fact that horror does not get Oscars. So it's always been second class. And it's only today that people are starting to realize that this isn't something new. This has happened throughout history. And if we just pay attention to it, maybe we'll see a little bit more respect for it. And maybe we'll see a little bit more respect for the women filmmakers who do take this kind of thing seriously. And don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking on the men who make these horror films either. I mean, if you've seen some of the really wonderful stuff that is getting Oscars these days, those are great examples. But women, they really, really stick to the point. They're very serious about it.
Shiva, from your perspective as a filmmaker in the independent scene, what are some areas that really concerns you of creating film, less low budget or restricted budget? That's a better term, because now we have crowdfunding sources to help the project out. But if that doesn't pull through, you have to use out-of-pocket expenses.
It's always about finding the money. I mean, my first film was funded mostly off of crowdfunding. After that, I've been going pretty much out of pocket or raising money independently through other sources. Like I have a few Etsy shops that I raise money to help fund these projects. I kick myself repeatedly for choosing the most expensive art medium there is, because if I would have just stuck to like writing novels, I'd probably be living a lot better. But it is hard because there are so many people out there now. I mean, when you have these crowdfunding platforms that pretty much anybody with a camera can set up a fund and say, hey, I'm going to make a movie with my buddies, send me money. And it when you have so many people doing it, it almost becomes, darn near impossible to get the kind of budgets that you really need for your story to do it how I would consider correctly. So you end up getting really creative trying to figure out how to tell your story the best way possible with like no money. And that's always been the biggest problem for me, is just trying to figure out, okay, I have X amount to make a movie that needs at least 3 times that amount. How do I make this work? And it's a puzzle, and it's kept me up at night pulling my hair out on many, many, many occasions. But that is probably the biggest obstacle, is just trying to figure out what to do when you just do not have the budget that you really need.
Mm-hmm. Especially when it comes to practical effects. I think that's the most expensive part of the production. You have to get the props, the materials to make an elaborate death scene, let's say.
Well, I'll tell you something that I've always found amusing. Back when I was working more as an effects artist, pretty much full time, one thing I noticed when it came to a lot of these really, low budget horror films is that effects was the last thing that they budgeted for. They would just consider, you just need enough money to make up a bunch of corn syrup blood and that's it. They wouldn't think about the expense of creating the gags or, fabricating the weapons or anything like that. So when I started making films, I always made it a point to put in at least, something elaborate in there, especially my earlier work, in order to show just my peers in this, in my particular area, hey, with a little bit of thought and a little bit of money, you can put something really interesting on the film rather than just using the same knife over and over again, stabbing people and throwing blood around. But it always amazed me that, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I would, get signed on for a project and then find out that they had budgeted nothing for the effects for a horror movie.
Oh. That doesn't make sense at all. How can you have a horror movie without a budget and practical effects? That's weird. I really think that they just thought that they would just be able to, borrow whatever I had in my workshop. But chances are I don't have a bust of the actress you're using, already made up or anything like that. It's just, I think that people who haven't worked around effects before have a really weird idea of how we do that magic.
it's funny that that's one of the tropes that people miss out upon. I mean, the trope of the serial killer doing a creative kill for every victim, that comes from the fact that, well, if he's just stabbing them with a knife every time, it gets boring. The audience forgets who does what. Nobody in the audience is going to remember the victims' names. What they're going to remember is that guy got run over by a car, that woman got folded in half and shoved into an envelope. This person got killed by a wood chipper. That's what they remember. And you don't even have to spend that much money on it. All you need is one big showcase one. And yet, we get a lot of indie films that literally, oh, wow, do you remember the scene where the woman got her belly torn out by a knife? Oh, which one? There were 5 of them in there. It's terrible, terrible, terrible.
Yeah, in fact, Duckie and we did a film a few years back, just, kind of goofing around, making fun of horror movies. And one of the things we did was we were trying to think of a murder weapon that had never been used that we knew of in a horror movie. And after much thought, we came up with a set of panpipes, and we killed one of our characters with panpipes, just to kind of illustrate the, hey, anything can be used as a weapon, and let's get creative here.
It's funny that you bring that up, like creative killing tools. That just reminds me of a Serbian film. In the final act, I wasn't expecting a penis to be used as a murder weapon.
Well, I think that's part of the fun, especially if you're doing like a slasher type film. Part of the fun is coming up with creative ways to kill. Duckie and I, whenever we write something that involves a lot of, people getting, picked off, we try to make sure that we have at least one really interesting device or way of doing things. Because to me, that's, part of the fun about going to these horror movies is, figuring out how creative were the filmmakers, how creative was the effects team. It's like going to an art gallery.
Yeah, it's so true. That is so absolutely true. And as independent filmmakers, with the current landscape of, not only do you have to create your film, but you also have to promote the film. So there's the business aspect. Do you have any insights on wearing both hats when it comes to creating the art and shopping the art to festivals and to the audience in general?
It sucks. Actually, that's actually a really excellent question for a lot of independent filmmakers. We're living in an environment now where the Hollywood budget has to be spread out amongst so much content because there are so many platforms for these things to be delivered to. And that budget is getting lower and lower and lower. And the real payoff is the actual distribution itself. So much of your effort has to be put into promoting yourself, into getting people interested in distributing these things. And the distribution is there. But again, it's hard to really think that far forward where any money that you're going to see is going to be well after the fact and usually be coming in small paychecks at a time. It's never one big lump sum either. I think that the landscape is changing so much that it's very, very hard to determine which way to actually be successful with this. The best advice that we were ever given was the fact that people buy and sell from people. Strangely enough, they don't really care about the product as much as they care about the people. If they like you, then it's going to sell. Hopefully, however, the only way that they're going to recognize you is if you do have good product. So it's a terrible, terrible, weird balancing act that you have to do with that. It's like being on a 3-ended seesaw or something. It's a lot of work.
Thankfully, we have the social media that helps us really promote short films or whatever the case may be to wider audiences, as opposed to 20 years ago we had to rely on regular mail and word of mouth.
Yeah.
Well, word of mouth is important, though. I mean, whenever we go to any of these festivals, especially if we're actually screening at them, I always have a stack of business cards, and I think this last time we actually ran out. It was a 3-day event. On the second day, we ran out of business cards. But I've been surprised at how many people didn't have those. They just, assumed that you were going to remember talking to them and your name and, their name and what they do. So that would be one thing that I would mention to filmmakers is always have cards or flyers or something that you can hand out when you're attending any type of events that, is either featuring your work or your work's a part of, in order to just give somebody a tangible thing to hold in their hand that they're going to stick in their pocket, that they'll take out later on when they get home. They'll put it on their desk. It kind of gets them to stick it in your head rather than just relying on people's memory, because when we're at these events, we meet 100, 200 people at a time. I can promise you we remember maybe 3 names.
We remembered you.
It's funny you say that, because after a few drinks, every name seems to be a blur.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have to commend. That was one highlight for the Women in Horror Festival. The after parties. Wow, that was amazing.
Yeah, those are always our favorite part. We do festivals every chance we get, and our favorite part is really just, hanging out, drinking, talking to people, telling stories, getting to know people more on a personal level rather than just, going into an auditorium, watching the film and leaving. You want to network and talk to people, and, sometimes it turns into, ends up being a working partnership. The last film we did, Father Alive, we ended up importing the crew from New York because we'd met them in a festival in New York, and we needed a camera crew, and the one that we usually use wasn't available. So out comes that business card.
Right. Yeah, and it just goes to show you something as primitive as a business card can work wonders. People always rely on, hey, just hit me up on Instagram or something like that.
I got to tell you that the face-to-face is by far the most important thing. We've worked with filmmakers who their only goal is to get awards at a 48. Their only goal is to get awards at small local conferences and such, and that's really aiming way too low. I mean, just the moment you say award, you really are aiming way too low. There are some prestigious awards out there for independent filmmakers, but the truth is, these awards, you can rack them up very, very easily. The bigger reward is these contacts themselves. The fact that we met you at Women in Horror and now we're getting interviewed is, as far as I'm concerned, that's a much better award than any piece of plastic that I can get anywhere. The fact that we were able to call upon a crew from New York to help us out when our crew was busy helping out with, if you don't mind a little bit of name dropping, a really, really big Hollywood thing with Kevin Smith. And just being able to get these things to happen like this is so much of a better award than any piece of plastic can ever be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And Shiva, with your writing, what products do you have on the web? You mentioned you have an Etsy site. What other mediums, rather, that's the proper term, what other mediums do you have available on the web for the audience to consume and get to know your craft?
Well, I have an official website, which sounds really pretentious. www.shivarodriguez.com is my website, and that's where I send everyone because it has all the links to like the films I've worked with, some of my shops, my Facebook. It also, every now and then I get a hair and decide to write an essay about filmmaking, generally when I've gotten frustrated after being on a set. But it also, I let people know when I've got a film that's showing that might be near their area, when one's been released, where they can find it. That's pretty much my go-to website where I post everything. I just found it more easy to condense it all into one thing rather than give you 500,000 different links, to try to remember. It's really easy. Just, www.myname.com.
That's a great idea to have everything condensed. And for your writing work, do you have anything on the table right now that you're constructing into a feature or a short?
Funny, you should ask that. Just before we had this interview with you, Duckie and I have been going through the second draft of a screenplay we're working on right now.
In addition to that, we have been thinking about branching out and novelizing several of our screenplays. We've got, I got to tell you, for any beginning writers out there, you're not a writer until you've got a huge pile of stuff that has been rejected. So we've got huge piles of stuff. We're used to things like rejection because of the fact that this is a big industry, and it's going to happen. No matter how awesome your work is, you're going to get rejected. So all we're doing is we're finding other mediums that we can transport them to. When we did Father of Lies Coming Home, that was actually...
Father of Lies Coming Home.
Father of Lies Coming excuse me.
You wouldn't be confused.
The Family Way
Coming Home was actually a piece of material that Shiva came up with that was a perfect story seed, but when we actually made a feature-length film screenplay out of it, it totally ruined the pacing on it. And we ended up recycling it and made it a short that was a prologue to the actual Family Way film itself. And you can see that one on Amazon Prime. So that was so successful, we're going to novelize some stuff. And again, it's about getting your name out there. And once your name is out there, that's when the money becomes easier to flow in and people are more comfortable with giving you money to make the bigger things.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that I did was with some of our older scripts or some of the stories that I came up with, because a lot of the times our scripts are based on short stories that I write. I started a Patreon page, and for my Patreons, I post a different chapter or something every month for people who want to follow along with the stories that, I know that are eventually, if they haven't already, been turned into screenplays. And that kind of helps, a little bit of money each month to, put into whatever our next production is going to be.
For creating content, Duckie, you have mentioned that the word rejection is always there. And in my other interviews, I've also heard that actresses and actors, they take it upon themselves to create their own content, whether it be for online distribution, just because they don't want to wait for the director to get back to them for an audition call, or if their piece got rejected, they always have content. Is that another platform you two are going to explore, say YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram?
Well, we try to. We've actually got a producer who theoretically knows more about that stuff than we do. So it's kind of like a big black box mystery to me sometimes. I mean, we're always attempting to find more ways to get our work out there, but it's also a matter of learning how these things are used properly. You look at one of my favorite actors out there, the guy who played Wesley Crusher on Star Trek, because I'm a huge Star Trek fan. And that was the most hated character in Star Trek, and yet he has become the most beloved personality in the Star Trek fandom because of how he used social media. And I just have to bow my head to the amazingness that is Will Wheaton because he did that. Sometimes it's just a matter of being able to figure this stuff out before anybody else does and getting in there.
Yeah, there's also the matter of time management, which is something we really suck at. A lot of the times, we've been told, hey, you should have a weekly show or something. Yeah, our weeks change all the time. I mean, last month alone, we only spent maybe 6 days at home the entire month of October. So having to plan a life around a weekly show or, sometimes even a monthly show can get really, really problematic, I guess the word would be.
Well, that is especially right now with all the film festivals in full swing, filmmakers are always busy at this point of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, we were home probably 6 days total last month, and we have a bunch of angry animals. Our pets hate us right now. But I can't imagine trying to be on the road. Like, we had to drive up to Richmond, Virginia from Florida. I can't imagine being on the road and then trying to record like a podcast or a video show while we're running around trying to do these things.
Yeah, we're not against it, but hey, if we got someone who knows how to manage our time better than we do.
That falls across the board for any type of content creator, whether it be a musician or a filmmaker, is the essence of time. I think sleep is just out the window when it comes to being a creative person.
Very true. But then again, if you're into film, you're used to working 18 to 20-hour days.
Right. Yeah. There's no 24-hour days when it comes to filmmaking whatsoever. There is always something to do, even when the camera stops rolling.
Now, if only more people would understand that.
I always hear that the independent scene is a competitive field. What are some interesting pointers or things that they should be aware of when they jump into creating their first film?
The first piece of advice that I give anybody who's talking about starting, making their own film, is to get onto other people's film sets first and learn how a film set works. Too many times I've, gone to sets being hired as an effects person and found out that the director, it's like their first or second film and they've never been on a film set before, which ends up making you a lot of enemies because you have a lot of people waiting around doing nothing, wondering, when are we going to get started? And you have a director and his, assistant trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, or they don't understand what other people's jobs are. That was probably what helped me the most and how it got to the point where I was even able to finish a feature film as a first time around, was because I had worked on like 20 films before even sitting in the director's chair, and understood what everybody's job was, and more importantly, let them do their jobs rather than, thinking I was going to micromanage everything. That's the first thing that I tell anybody who's talking about wanting to, direct a film or, create something like that.
You really do hit the nail on the head with it, though, how people do consider this to be a competitive field. And it so is not a competitive field. It is a cooperative field, which is not the same thing. Yeah, people are going to be competing for jobs out there. That is true. But the thing is that making a film is not just one person, their idea, and their work. It is a person who can communicate their idea to an art department, a person who can communicate their idea to their director of photography, a person who can communicate their idea to their actors. And everybody has to play a part in making this. If you think it's just you, if you think that you are the only person who can possibly do this, then you will fail at this industry. You have to depend upon other people, and they're not always going to be the same people. If you don't get that huge list of friends that you can call up at any time of any day and expect at least one of them to be able to take on these jobs that you cannot do yourself, then you're going to be making just really, really cheap and bad product for as long as you can. You have to open yourself up big time.
Through experience, I have went through that myself. Whereas someone wants to be contributing to the project, let's say, for example, from the director's role, and immediately they would say, I have X amount of credits, I could do it this way, your way is no good. There's always going to be that type of person. But if you want to put your project forward, you got to work around it, find ways to agree with one another in order to get the job done.
Yeah, if you think that you are an auteur, you are not an auteur. Trust me.
Yeah, one of the things that I do when I'm directing that I've surprised a lot of people with, because I've never had the same crew twice, so to speak. I mean, I'll have different members of a crew come in for multiple projects, but it's never the completely same crew. And one thing I do that has surprised people is that, when I'm getting ready to do something, I'll turn to a PA who's supposed to be the lowest man on the totem pole and ask him or her if they've seen something I haven't, if they see something wrong with, with something we're doing. So I've gotten to the point where I have my crews that are comfortable coming up to me and saying, hey, Shiva, we're looking at this and this doesn't seem to be working, or this doesn't look like it would be something a character would do, or, things like that, which in my mind help, enhance the project, because if it was just my vision and not everybody contributing to it, it would probably be a boring story.
Yeah, you've really got to be the one who maintains control, but by the same token, everybody's got something to give.
It's right. It's like the captain of the ship. Everybody has their roles to do. You delegate, and I hear the word micromanage. That's a 9 to 5 word right there. Someone who micromanages everything. They'll become the hated person on the set.
Well, it's not just that, but that person, if you try to micromanage a film set, you're heading towards a stroke. You really are.
Also, I noticed, Shiva, on your IMDb, you had worked on the film One Night of Fear. That really stuck out for me because we had, in fact, interviewed one of the actors, Jimmy Dempster, here on this podcast a couple of times.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember Jimmy.
We love Jimmy.
This is an open platform right now for the both of you. Any upcoming projects that you have in the works, or anything else that you care to add, self-promote yourself, open platform. And if you have social media handles that you care to add, feel free.
Well, right now we're working on a super secret project that we can't really talk about right now. We'll probably have more on that. We'll be on my website as soon as certain green lights lit up. But we're not at liberty to talk about what we're working on right this second. We do have a short film in post that we're going to be adding a few scenes to make it, flow a little bit better. It had originally been done for a 48-hour film project, and then the nightmare thing happened, and it got stuck on the editor's machine, and she couldn't export it. So our producer was, a little bit upset about that, but we looked at it and it's like, hey, with a few added scenes and a little bit more tweaking, this could make a really good short for, showing out there. So we've got that. That'll probably be out next year around in the festivals, and then probably on Amazon or something like that. I'll let Duckie add from here.
Oh, I'm going to add now?
Yeah. Now.
Well, as I said, keep an eye out. When it comes to social media, we're most active on Facebook. I'm under Duckie Rodriguez, and Shiva is under Shiva Rodriguez. Actually, they changed yours yet? Or okay, she's still under Shiva Rodriguez on there. Do you have a Twitter handle?
I do, but I never use it.
Oh, okay. Maybe we'll end up getting a Twitter handle out there sometime. Check out ShivaRodriguez.com, and I'm sure that all the updates are going to be right there. We do try to keep people informed about what we're doing, and hopefully we're going to have a lot more content and a lot more different directions that are available to people in the very near future. So keep an eye out. Also, I'm going to be doing some science fiction. I know this is a horror kind of thing, but hey, I love me my science fiction, babies.
Science fiction as acting or producing or writing?
Yes. I do lots of science fiction writing. Science fiction is obviously much, much harder to do when you're talking about an independent budget. I've gotten better at bringing it down to an independent budget, especially when you see some of the really good science fiction that is coming out there and people are appreciating it more. Science fiction, fantasy, both of those being very much the same kind of position that horror is in, as being the redheaded stepchild of filmmaking. But we're seeing some better stuff out there. It's getting more appreciation, so I'm going to be focusing more upon that a little bit, and we'll see what happens with that.
Oh, all the best to you on that. And one question for you, Duckie, especially for the acting part. Breaking into each role or really conveying the characters, I'm always interested in how does the actor get into the role, to the mindset of a certain character, and then move on to the next role and the next one.
I actually have it easier than some when I'm working with Shiva, because I know how twisted her mind is. And when she starts going upon a particular theme or a particular element, I understand the points that she wants me to hit. But the important thing as an actor, especially when you're doing other roles, not with a person you're so familiar with, is that you be able to make the character into a real person, and that you figure out what is important with the character and how does that drive the storytelling. Ultimately, every story and every part of a story should be 100% directed towards moving that story along. And if you can figure out what those story points are, if you can figure out what's going to drive it properly, that's what makes an actor's role a lot easier. It is work. It is work. I've been to too many sets where, honestly, even the director that I've worked with have thought, oh, you're an actor. All you do is hit lines and hit marks. It's so much more than that. You genuinely do have to do work in figuring out what is making my character feel this way at the moment in order to give a proper performance. And I've never really had a problem with moving on from one character to the next. I know that some people get really stuck in those kind of things, but I like the old anecdote about how, why don't you just try acting instead of becoming this character so much? It's not too bad. I've loved the scripts that I've been in. I've genuinely loved them all, even if they were like crappy little 48-hour things.
Or
It's
like you're working One Night of Fear.
Or working when I worked in One Night of Fear, I had just such a tiny little bit role in there, and yet, oh gosh. For One Night of Fear, the original release of One Night of Fear actually did underutilize Shiva a lot. And they realized that they underutilized her because they didn't have a lot of deaths. It was lots of talking on the screen. So they called her back in, and I came in as an assistant to help her out. And I ended up getting to be on there. With the lead actor could not be there. So I played the lead actor from behind wearing a wig. And as the killer, I got to kill myself by chopping my head off with a machete, which was a lot of fun camera tricks and special effects there. And that was like my big claim to fame on that one.
Yeah, little insight on filmmaking right there. It always surprises me. Well, intrigues me actually. Every time when I watch a film, I always look for the emotional context, the depth that the actor portrays. And in certain instances, in some films, unfortunately, the actor, you feel like they are just reciting lines off the script. And in other films, they're like, wow, this person really put their heart and soul to make this character seem so real.
Yeah, and that's with the same actors, too. It's amazing how that does happen. But again, that goes with having some joy in the script that you're working on. You have to love it to some degree. And you have to realize that the character is not you. So when you're going to take the character and find those emotional moments, the pitfalls and the highlights, that really is the meat and potatoes to a person who loves acting, is being able to be someone different, someone has motivations that are entirely different from your own. But you got to go in loving it. And I have noticed, at least in the independent field, that the people that I call professionals as actors are the ones who, again, they will go in to the worst budget with a first-time director, first-time writer, and they will give it their all no matter how bad it is. And you can see that on screen all the time. My favorite example of this that's actually famous is if you ever look at Eric Roberts. Eric Roberts, nobody knows whether they should call him an A-list or a B-list actor, because he does both. But you'll notice every time he's in a B movie, you'll notice that like all the other actors sort of like stand up straighter, and they're doing a little bit better when they're operating against him, because he always gives it his all every single time. Mm-hmm. And, if you're an actor, that's what you should be striving for is, gosh, this movie is terrible. It's low budget. It sucks. Everybody running it is terrible. But by golly, I'm giving it my best.
And to close out the interview for Shiva, question, as a writer myself and knowing the intricacies that comes along with writing a script, what are some of the areas that you find most frustrating? Because most people who watch a film don't understand that screenwriting is a process. You have the first draft, second draft, shooting draft, and if something needs to be changed along the film production, the script has to be edited along the way?
Well, what I find the most frustrating is really going from draft to draft and what we call killing our darlings. You know, when you write something that you think is beautiful, but it's just not working for the script, and you have to tear it out. That's always frustrating for me. And when Duckie and I write together, usually I'll write the first draft, and then I'll send it to him for second draft, and then we start working on it together after that point. And we'll sit there and we'll look at every line of dialogue, and we'll love the line and know that it's clunky, and tear our hair out trying to figure out if there's any way we can make it work. When you're writing something that you know that you'll be directing, it's a little easier because then you can convey to the actor, a different inflection or, a tone or something to put with the clunky dialogue to make it a little bit smoother. But if you're writing just for, on spec, it's very, very different. And that's probably another challenge is, if you're writing for somebody else versus writing for yourself. When we're writing a script that we know we're going to be producing, boy, we throw some of the rules right out the window. But if we're writing a spec screenplay to, take out to the market or whatnot, everything has to be perfect. And it's really, really tricky and frustrating to have to take out a great line because it doesn't work, or, tone a character, if not write a character completely out because, you're eating up too much time. When you start getting, to page like 103, it's time to cut down on some things,
Right.
Now, I know that you said that this is the end of the interview, but can I include one story about you?
Sure. I hope it's a good story.
Okay. I love this story about you because I get the feeling that you would never actually tell it. We actually met this gentleman at Women in Horror Film Festival, which is a fantastic film festival. It features some incredible talent. I don't think I've ever actually seen a bad film there, as opposed to many other film festivals that I've been to. Now, we spent a lot of time talking and drinking with this guy. Shiva has a boot on her foot that doesn't allow her to walk around much, so she's hanging out with him. I got to go out during the after party for this film festival, and unfortunately, the location that we were booked at, they went ahead and booked 2 wedding parties at the same time as our after party. The after party was fantastic. The women were dressed to a T because they just came out of a wedding, an award ceremony. And suddenly we had all these drunken guys who were petting and pawing all over them. Like the worst thing that you can possibly happen at an event that is about celebrating women in the field.
Right.
Well, the great thing is as I was watching every last person at this group, including the men that were there to support them, you had these strong women that were very, very skillfully turning away these drunken men. And then when they wouldn't take the hint, you had these really smart guys jumping in and doing a little bit of C blocking, if you know what that means, of course. But when I go out to see Shiva and this gentleman here talking, and I had such a wonderful time talking with him, well, one of the drunk guys came out, and he got tired of his advances being turned away, so he throws a glass and it shatters, and it was like a gunshot when it comes out.
Right. Yeah.
So this guy here, guess who was up immediately, like a gunshot himself, wearing a cape and everything, immediately running over to this guy and really, really casually taking him out of the action and calming him the hell down. I love you, man. You are a great person.
Thank you.
And thank you for supporting women in horror.
Well, yeah, that comes from being living in the Bronx. You have to have that mindset. When you see something that's not right, jump in. Of course, keep your safe distance, but at the same time, you have to keep everyone who you're with safe.
Yeah, you handled it masterfully, and I was just sitting there watching you, trying to make sure nobody was coming up behind you while you were doing this. But it was beautiful because I usually see myself in that role, but I got to tell you, I have to bow my head to a master. This is mutual respect, my brother.
Thank you so much. It was great meeting the both of you at the Women in Horror Film Festival. That was our first time at a film fest. And it was just the love everybody was giving, the networking, the communication. it really opened my eyes to horror is not just horror creating gore on screen and getting applause, and as you mentioned, getting awards. It's all about networking, everybody getting together, helping each other out, supporting one another, and the community is so large. Is really great to see that.
Well, you're a part of it, brother.
Yep, your family now.
Segment 2. Exclusive interviews. Director. Writer. Jennifer Nicole Stang.
Concluding our exclusive interview segment is our conversation with director, writer Jennifer Nicole Stang. This interview is also our inaugural feature on Latino filmmakers titled Cineastas de Terror. Jennifer Nicole Stang's film, The Whistler, is currently doing the film festival rounds, where it has garnered countless awards ranging from Best Horror Short to Best Thriller. Specifically, The Whistler won Best International Horror Short at this year's Women in Horror Film Festival. It also received a nomination for Best Writing. In our conversational interview with Jennifer Nicole Stang, we discussed the various aspects of her horror short, The Whistler, as well as aspects in filmmaking in general, especially Latino and women in horror. Without further ado, here is my interview with Jennifer Nicole Stang. Thank you for joining me, Jennifer Nicole Stang, for your time, for this interview opportunity, discussing your career and your award-winning film that is really taking the film festival by storm, the film The Whistler. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Let's kick it off with an origin story. Please share some information about yourself from your humble beginnings and what got you into the creative field, film production.
Absolutely. So I was born in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and I lived in the UK, in the Toronto area, Philadelphia. I lived in Spain for a couple years, in the UK, LA for 8 years, and I'm currently in Vancouver. It started with my dad's work, and then I just kept traveling myself. So I started off actually as a ballet dancer, and I went to the National Ballet School in Toronto, and I was doing that for quite a while. And I had also been working as a musician as well. So I started off in the arts, and I was acting kind of on and off just for fun. And then I got quite serious about it when I moved to LA. And after some time, I discovered while I was working on a short film with some friends, I got behind the camera one day and I realized, this is what I really enjoy doing. I like telling stories from behind the camera. So it was quite an organic shift from performing to filmmaking. And then from there, I just got into as many aspects of the filmmaking process as I could. And I started to understand the technical side of things, and really enjoyed post-production as well, editing and color grading. So yeah, I kind of got my finger in every pie, so to speak. And yeah, I just really enjoy telling stories, being a filmmaker, and rather than performing, I prefer telling stories from the beginning to end, from pre-production to production to post. So yeah, I really enjoy doing that now.
Great. Thank you for that insight. And also for delving into the production aspect, one of the challenging aspects of any film would have to be the editing process, getting everything, all the footage together in order to convey a proper visual narrative. Was your transition into that area seamless as you had hoped it to be?
I think at first what I did as a filmmaker and kind of learning how to edit and my beginnings there, I experimented with visuals and thought, okay, and with my background in music, I thought, well, okay, editing is quite musical. There's a flow to telling a story. There's a pace. And so I kind of focused on that. And so I think my musical background kind of, I saw it from a different perspective coming in, I would think. And I started working that way. But with editing, usually when I'm directing, if I'm directing a project, I'm already editing the film in my head. I'm already creating that, the flow and feel, and I'm trying to see, okay, if I combine this with that, and if I try to tell it this way. So I always have the editing in mind when I'm directing.
Right. And that also applies when you're writing the script as well. You have the visuals on how do you want to direct the certain scene, and then it flows from there.
Exactly. No, it's so true. Even when you're writing, you have the visuals in your head and you're trying to create, a concise story, and you really try to visualize it and edit while you're going. So yeah, exactly. It's the same process there too.
And with that aspect, what I find, especially with the indie scene, is a filmmaker is the writer, is the director, then he goes on, or he or she goes on to the editing phase. Is it always a good thing to wear all the hats, especially when money is very scarce in the indie scene?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, I've had to, as an indie filmmaker, wear all those hats, and it's been great for me to learn, all the processes of filmmaking and to, understand what each department does. But I think, however, two heads are always better than one, and certainly three or four. And I like to get an opinion from, other people. And even though I still, edit my own work, I certainly get my producers in there to, give me feedback. And it's really important because you're so in the project, your head's completely in it. You might miss, basic things that other people say, hey, this doesn't make sense, or what's going on here, or, this isn't clear. So that's so important to have, I find.
Looking at your IMDb, wow, you have so many credits in different fields. It's amazing. Congrats to your growing career in that aspect, every aspect.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the writing. You have 16 credits. Most of them are Spanish, but it's a mixture of Spanish, English. But the bulk of it seems to be horror. Is that a genre that you felt you could delve in with the ease and in comparison to other genres?
Yeah, the thing is about horror is that I didn't really start off, I watched some and, got very excited by the ones that I saw, but I wasn't very familiar with that world. I was familiar with more thrillers, and I really like mystery and suspense. And I think even with, there's a short film I wrote called El Lago, The Lake. And that's a very kind of spiritual, kind of visual art piece, if you will. And that was kind of, I added some mystery into that, but it was a very different it was kind of a lighter version of kind of some of the work that I do now. And which is kind of like, different side of the same coin, I always think. But, I always liked creating mystery. And I think with horror, I was an actress in a couple horror shorts, and I found that from the production side, there was a lot to do with it, actually, the makeup, the effects, it was so much fun. And I thought, oh, this is something I would love to try and play with. And, I think the horror genre, a lot of people think, oh, it's so dark. But, you're actually playing with so much and discovering so much. And a lot of horror, there's so much kind of socio-political commentary. Oftentimes there's, a lot of themes to discuss. And so I find it quite an interesting genre. So yeah, that's something that's very exciting to me right now.
Absolutely. And for horror, thrillers, and sci-fi, they're all related in some way because they each have their own subgenres. It crosses cultures, and especially for Latino Americas, we have so many stories to tell. For example, La Llorona is another film that is coming out.
That's coming out soon.
Right. And I feel that the spotlight, it's not focused on the Latino community as it should, because we have a lot of stories to tell, and a lot of filmmakers are out there telling these stories in the indie scene.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also with, the States, that there is such a huge Latino community right now. And I think, films like La Llorona that are coming out are so timely, and they're exciting stories. I think, the world has so many stories to tell, and it's wonderful that different audiences get to hear these different stories, that there's an opportunity to hear about them. And I think that's wonderful. And what I did with The Whistler, even though the Western world is familiar, and the Pied Piper, we kind of based our evil entity off of that character. It's a German story. It's a folktale. And in the original, it ends up quite dark, with the Pied Piper leading the children off of the cliff to their death. And, it's a story that is quite interesting to me. And I think there are so many stories all over the world that, there are so many possibilities of exploration creatively. And, that's part of the fun process for sure.
When I've seen the film at the Women in Horror Film Festival, the first thing that came into my mind is the parallels. And as I had mentioned, it crosses cultures, horror. So when I seen the film, it's like, wait, this has the feel of the folklore, the cuco, that the kids will get taken away from this mysterious entity. Lo and behold, I didn't know it was German in origin as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You're right. That really crosses cultures. And, there are so many, I read a book by Evan Swentz recently on the fairy faith and fairies in kind of Ireland, Scotland, that area. And he compares these kind of creatures to other creatures in different countries, like in Asia, and there's, a group in Africa that believes in the same kind of creatures. So, I think there's a lot in common that we have with one another. We just, it's part of the educational process. And I think that's what's great about movies, is bringing, if it's entertaining and educational and enlightening, it's great to bring that to audiences.
Right. With The Whistler, the production, how was the process? How long did it take from the initial script to the final cut on the editing floor?
Okay, that's a good question. I think the script was finished in May of 2017. And then I had been working on it for a few months prior. I think it was finished in May. And then I was actually new to Vancouver. I had just moved here, basically, and I wanted to shoot in Vancouver. So I had a lot of work to do in terms of getting to know people. And I was lucky enough to meet both of my producers at a women in film organization here in Vancouver. And, one was Canadian, one was also kind of like me, an American transplant. And she was looking to jump from marketing, because she had done marketing at Sony, and she wanted to get into the production world and start as a producer. And we really clicked, and she really kind of liked what I was doing. So she jumped on board. And then I also met Karen Wong, who is a very experienced producer here in Vancouver. And, Vancouver, Canada, with indie film, things are done a little bit differently and there are different rules. So it was very important to have Karen on board as well as Sasha. And then I think, let's see, the process there from Sasha and I, we worked mostly July and August and September. We shot late September, and we shot in North Vancouver and up in Whistler, BC as well. We just had 3 days to shoot.
Wow.
And then we jumped right into the editing process in October. And I think we took, probably a couple months. I would say a month or two for post-production. And then we weren't able to, I think, in December, then we got the color grade finished. And so it was kind of ready by mid-January. And then we started sending it out to festivals. So it was done relatively quickly.
That is a fast process. I think, in my opinion, the filming is good if you know what you're doing, of course. But that process is fast. The post work, that's a different story, because you have to. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to put each scene and how to convey the flow properly.
Exactly, very much. And the editing process was surprisingly easy. Sometimes you really create, and for the better, a different film than what you're shooting in production. But this time it was switched around. So actually, from the script, because we only had 3 days to shoot, and we were very ambitious, and we wanted to shoot the forest scene at twilight to get that kind of feel, instead of light the whole forest at night. And that was quite tricky because we only had so much time. And so we ended up actually running out of time, and I had to cut a few, and it wasn't very much, but we did have to cut a few scenes and moments from the forest. And it wasn't exactly like the script. And I think usually, you in the editing process, you change things around, but on set, Karen came to me and she said, "Oh, I'm worried about today. We only have so much time." And I said, "Okay, that's okay. We can do the following. We can cut." And then I would sort of cut it in my head and, try to make that work. So that was kind of an interesting process. And, it's a typical indie shoot. Very little time and long hours.
Of course.
And, and just 3 days. So, so we ended up cutting quite a bit. But in the editing room too, there were things that I changed, and you think that certain images in your head. Oh, I need all these images to make this make sense, and you realized, oh no, if I cut it down, I just need these two. So I think that's also the interesting part, is you're trying to make it a good product and make it as compact as possible with nothing superfluous. So that's always a fun challenge of editing, I think, just to try to get an even better film. And even if the story changes, it's usually for the better. And so it's just, it's definitely, can definitely be a challenge.
One aspect that I really enjoy after the opening scene is the cinematography. The camera work, the lighting, everything just conveys that the audiences knows something's about to happen, and just with the lighting alone, you already feel that sense of trepidation in the character.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, thank you for that. Naeem and I, so Naeem's our cinematographer, he and I, we were kind of on the same page from day one. When I went to speak with him, I saw his reel and I reached out to him, and he liked the idea. And we definitely saw eye to eye about style and color from the get-go. And we did discuss it throughout. We thought, oh, should we change this, or should we give it this feel instead? And we always came back to our original idea. So that was really fun. And so it makes the shoot very very seamless and kind of easy to get through, because you're not discussing on the day. You kind of have everything set and ready to go. So that was great working with him.
That's the important thing for any filmmaker. Have a great cinematographer. They could really help bring the images to life.
Exactly. And that's the point, is trying to tell your story visually in the best way possible. And if you have a great DP, it just makes your life much easier.
Oh, absolutely. And another focus for The Whistler is the incorporation of innocence. In this case, we have a little girl, and we also have her sister also exhibiting that innocence. How was it crafting these characters to make them so vulnerable?
Because The Whistler's actually proof of concept for the feature, as you know, and there are also two sisters in that film as well. So the film was kind of done those characters are a very basic version of our characters in the script, naturally, because you can't explain everything in 11 minutes. But right. I think there's nothing more precious than family, at least to me. And so I think when you're in charge of, the older sister Lindsay's in charge of her younger sister Becky, and Becky is young, she's vulnerable, she's not as strong as her older sister. And I think if you're in charge of someone or something so vulnerable, then you feel very, if something goes wrong, it's the worst feeling. And I think, it's a very immediate kind of setup, I think, between the two sisters. But, I think Lindsay's trying to also find a way of discovering who she is and kind of moving away from innocence, but she's still very much, attached to her younger self as well. I think that's kind of projected from her little sister. And I think that's what she's battling in her head. So, when she wakes up, it could be, Lindsay, when she wakes up in the middle of the night, I think her worst fears, come true in a sense, and she has to face them, and ends up kind of, it's certainly suggestive in the film that she kind of has given up her innocence, and that's why she dies. But, I think it's just, there's nothing more important than, losing, or nothing scarier than losing the people you love. So I think that's just, something, a topic that's just very easy to discuss, and the stakes are always quite high for the characters.
Shorts. Most indie filmmakers, they want to start out their career, they venture into creating short films. And I've heard this a couple of times before, creating or crafting a visual storyline in a limited amount of time, especially for film festivals. 10 minutes, I believe, is the max in order to be qualified as a short film. Is that difficult to craft script-wise? Setting up the characters?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. It's always harder to write something shorter. I think, Mark Twain said, I'd write you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And I think writing a short is very hard because, what we did in The Whistler is kind of trying to show proof of concept more than anything, because there are more questions at the end than a typical short. And I think what is tricky is to say, hey, these are my characters. There's no time to explore those characters, to see what their idiosyncrasies are, what makes them tick, what they fear and what they love. So it's absolutely very difficult to make a short and to be clear. And, also, a lot of my shorts in the past have been basically just visual art pieces, and I was mostly exploring. And, with The Whistler, it has a beginning, middle, and end. And it's always, it's a challenge to get your film clear to people within 11 minutes. And it's a great great exercise for a writer. It really helps me with features because, in features, you also have to have your scenes very compact. So working on shorts is actually a great exercise.
Mm. Yeah. And you had mentioned the characters, you mentioned they were basic, but in a way, they were executed quite spectacularly, given that they have a story arc from Act 1 to Act 3. And by the final scene, I'm sure audiences will have the same sentiment as I, that, oh, wow, that happened to her? Oh, what happened? And as you said, there's so many questions left unanswered after that.
Yeah, that was the fun part. I definitely wanted to leave it open-ended, and that was something that was discussed. And yeah, it's always fun to, I don't know, I have fun with that, just to, hopefully leave an audience with questions and thoughts. And and thank you for that compliment. And in terms of basic, I definitely meant that our characters are, you only see a part of them.
Right.
It's nothing like, you don't see, everything else that's going on. But if that came through, then that's wonderful.
Right. Even with the antagonist, the supernatural threat, we only see a glimpse, but that was just enough to convey the sense of dread, threat for these young women.
Oh, great! Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, the our actor Nelson Lease, he did such a marvelous job of the Whistler, and I really wanted to put the character in there more. Mm-hmm. But as you say, you at the end of the day, you're creating a story and a product, and you have to say what's more effective. And so I thought, well, if he's in there a lot, and if it's, if everything is revealed too quickly, or if he's in there too much, it won't give the same effect. And so, and we did, there was we had him in the makeup chair for that scene, I think for 3-4 hours. So wow. There was, and we did it on the cheap too. And our makeup artist, Chantal, she did a great job of working with very little. And, it was kind of a shame. He did all this work. He had, he had done all sorts of character. He had really worked on this character, and he had done some wonderful things, and you just can't show all of it, which was a shame. But that's the beauty of working with a great actor, that just gives you a lot of options. And even though you can only show so much. So right. Yeah, that was really fun working with him.
Well, it works for the benefit. If it's a proof of concept, you give a glimpse of the antagonist, that leaves a bigger payday for the full feature. And with that said, what is in the works for the feature? Is that currently in negotiations or planning?
It's still in development, so we're just starting to get going with it. We'll be, discussing with other producers and getting an idea of our kind of cast wish list, and we're just about to dive in. So yeah, there's a lot of work for us going forward, but we're very excited. And the feature film is going to be featuring a lot of more puritanical sort of torture. And it's really based off of this evil entity, as in the proof of concept, that, was one of the people that came to America, one of the founding sort of cities, and kind of the torture devices they used then, and that they were using in the UK at the time as well, since that was brought over. And we really explore that kind of, the Puritan sort of society, even though it was there and it was very brief, it's obviously left quite a role on society and how society has been built in the States. And certainly people, always think about the witch trials in Salem still, it's still very present on people's minds.
Right.
And there's a lot to dive in and explore when it comes to that. So even though it's set in modern times, we jump into the past so to speak, with, bringing back certain elements from that time period. So it's going to be quite an exciting ride. And we're looking forward to jumping in and start developing it.
Sounds great. Oh, that's a great pitch right there. Closing out with two last questions. But first, curiosity. Would you be exploring crowdfunding for the full feature of The Whistler, since this short had so much success on the film festival circuit?
That's a great question. And, Sasha and I have been discussing that going forward. We're still not sure because we're just starting. We're not quite sure which direction to take, but, because it is and will be my first feature that I direct, funding will be, certainly we'll probably have to get funding from different places. So I'm pretty sure crowdfunding will be one of the roads to take for sure.
Great. And now on to our final two questions. This one is just an inspirational aspect that I infuse into all our interviews. What are your suggestions, advices for up-and-coming filmmakers, especially in the Latino community?
Everyone has a very different path. And I think these days there are certainly more opportunities for filmmakers. Like actually Mexico, they have wonderful grants there that I learned about when I went to the Oaxaca Film Festival. I was kind of educated in what they're trying to do for their indie film community, which is great. And I think the Latino community voices, everyone's voice needs to be heard. And I encourage people to, try different things, get your, finger in every pie, try all aspects of filmmaking. I worked as, craft services once on a short film because I wanted experience. And I learned so much and, how a film set functions and everyone's roles. And it's great to understand what everyone, the head of each department, what their job is and what they're looking to do. Because, when you're on set, someone will say, oh, this element is the most important thing, and you hear that from the art department, or the DP said, no, this is the most important thing we need to focus on now. So you need to understand where everyone's coming from and then work together to, especially if you're under time constraint, to, get through and to try to just work with people. And it's really important to understand people's perspective. And so you get a better product. And in terms of starting, just these days, everything is more accessible. People are shooting on iPhones and, it's just really important to experiment. And the more you do so and the more people you meet, the more you'll do and find your path, I think, for anyone. So that would be my advice. And to do what you love, that's the most important thing. It's not about, and I think any indie filmmaker knows, it's certainly not about making money. So if you want to get into the film industry for making money, I think you're in the wrong business.
Right,
for sure. It's not about that. So, and because everyone's trying to say like, oh, what's popular now? I want to make it. So, what kind of a film will people want to see? Well, everyone wants to see what you're, really turned on about. That's what I've learned as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, being commissioned to write different things for people. And, if your heart's in it, it might sound corny, but you have to follow that and you have to do what you're really, really turned on by. So that would be my advice.
Right. And to touch up on the last statement that you made, that's an error that most filmmakers, when you first start, I want to make the next Jason or the next Freddy. No, we already have that. Do something that hasn't been seen before.
Yeah, and that speaks to them. I think that's the most important thing. And you do hear that more and more, at least I have, from producers. And, there are a lot of people that are, that find financing and certainly want something that that sells. And that's another perspective of the filmmaking industry. And it's an important one because it's important to make money on your film in order to do the next one. You know, it is for the people, it's for audiences. So I'm not saying that that's not important, but the core of what you focus on in your work, that has to be something that you really love.
So true. And the final bit of our interview, it's open platform. You could plug in where audiences could view The Whistler and anything else you care to add, as well as your social media handles.
Sure. So you can check out more information about The Whistler at thewhistler.movie. That's our official site. And on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, we're present. And you can find us at Whistler Movie. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. You can find me. I think my Twitter handle is actually at @Yenny, _Yenny, and then Jennifer Nicole Stang for Facebook and Instagram. I think those are mostly the sites, and you'll certainly find more information there. I know the trailer's on our website, as is kind of social media.
Great. Thank you once again, and congratulations. The Whistler, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is really taking over the film festival circuit, winning awards left and right. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very nice surprise for sure.
Segment 3, Trailer First Impressions. Leprechaun Returns.
You must be one of the girls. Fixing up the old house way out there from campus.
You know about that?
Small town.
My mom used to live here.
She didn't tell you anything about the place where you're going?
No. Everything okay?
Yeah, everything. We made sure of it.
Kicking off our trailer first impressions is Leprechaun Returns. This film is directed by Steven Kostanski and is written by Suzanne Keeley. The synopsis reads as follows. The Leprechaun returns. Once again, when a group of girls unwillingly awaken him when they tear down a cabin so that they can build a new sorority house. Going into more detail on the storyline, according to IMDb, 25 years ago, a young woman and her friends stopped an evil leprechaun by shoving a 4-leaf clover in its mouth and watching its melting body fall in a well in North Dakota. What happened to his pot of gold is anyone's guess. Today, the property is run by the AU sorority house of a premier eco-science college. This next entry into the Leprechaun franchise, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This will be the 9th installment? And to tell you the truth, as a horror connoisseur that I am, I haven't seen any installments to the Leprechaun franchise. There is even one, Leprechaun in the Hood, and for some strange reason, Leprechaun Back to the Hood. Interesting. In any event, I prefer horror that is more psychological, serious in nature. Very rarely do I stray into horror that elaborates on comedic effects, and I'm not talking special effects either. While we're on the topic of special effects, Leprechaun Returns. The practical effects of this creature looks like a very elaborate Halloween costume. As the actor is speaking, the facial expressions are almost non-existent. It is almost as if he is wearing some type of heavy latex mask. There's no natural face movement. And on the special effects, We know that this film is, of course, not budget. Hollywood is not backing this, so we have to think small scale, independent scope. Yet still, the CGI effects on this film, it is so riveting. It looks almost real. Yes, I know I'm being sarcastic there, but I am sure there are fans of the Leprechaun franchise who are looking forward to this, much like there are a close-knit of fans of the Chucky Child's Play franchise. And much like the Child's Play franchise, Leprechaun shares same parallels, being as many films as has come out to both of these franchises, none can resurrect the impact that these films once had. Will I watch The Leprechaun? Yes, it would be on my queue, but at the very bottom of my list.
The Intruder.
You remember that conversation we had about grabbing that house up in Napa?
I want a house. I want a family. I want our kids to be able to play outside.
This is it, 6741.
This is so pretty.
I'm Charlie Peck.
Scott Howard.
Welcome to Foxglove. My great-great-grandfather built this house. It's the only house I ever lived in. I put my soul into it. Foxglove is yours now.
We'll take good care of her.
The next film in our trailer first impressions is The Intruder. This film will be released on the 26th of April 2019. It is a PG-13 thriller. Dion Taylor serves as director with David Lowery as writer. The synopsis: a psychological thriller about a young married couple who buys a beautiful Napa Valley house on several acres of property, only to find that the man that they brought it from refuses to let go of the property. Now, how many times, as a horror connoisseur or as a casual horror thriller aficionado, how many times have we seen this before? I could go down the list of countless films, from Samuel L. Jackson to Single White Female, let's say. This concept is so tired and boring, it's almost to the level of ridiculousness. And it is shameful that you have African American cast as the lead, and yet they're given such generic, unrelatable characters. Dennis Quaid, a veteran in Hollywood, portrays the antagonist. I could delve into how this film is going to be, because I've seen this film so many times before. If this film lasts 2 weeks in cinemas, that is a record. Now, I could go on how stylish the cinematography is, and of course, it's exhibited in the trailer, as well as good cast, good acting by the cast. However, the story, too generic. Seen this many times before. I'm going to give this film a hard pass. As I stated before, there's countless films that trek on the same tropes. Weak characters, weak antagonist. This fatal attraction / psychological thriller, obsession. Nah, this is not going to work in this formula. And it's a shame, because the cast, they have lots of potential. As I mentioned, African Americans as protagonists. Huge applause there. Huge takeaway, the roles that they are given. What a demise. This would have great idea if it was back in the early 90s. Come on, director, Mr. Writer. We're nearing 2020. Why are you using regurgitated content?
Cam.
I slit my throat last night.
Holy shit.
What are you looking at? Nothing.
She's texting a boy.
Alice, I'm gonna tell her. My rank needs to be better. I'm like this close to breaking top 50. I can taste it.
Customer support, how can I help you?
Hi, I'm locked out of my account and I think you guys are just replaying an old show or something.
I don't think that's possible. We can't do that.
Okay, well, does it say my channel's live?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, we have a new friend.
That person is not me.
Closing out our trailer first impressions is the film titled Cam, soon to release on Netflix on 16th of November 2018. The film is written by Danielle Goldhaber and is written by Isa Mazio, Daniel Goldhaber, and Isabel Link Levey. The synopsis: Alice, an ambitious camp girl, wakes up one day to discover she's been replaced on her show with an exact replica of herself. This horror mystery thriller can be interpreted with the movie poster alone. If you look, this is symbolism 101. You have a character that is warped in some type of videotape 80s static glitch effect. This tells a lot about what the protagonist is going through. She is falling into abyss of her mind. She is probably experiencing some type of psychological trauma and or multiple personality disorder. In any event, the trailer offers superb acting. It's evident, as well as the cinematography. Look at the light painting, for example, of the young girl's room. It tells of those neon colors. Tell her sexiness. It tells her youthfulness. The color palette in the other scenes also dictate the tonality of the film. Huge applause there. I'm perplexed though. The film does have a familiar feel. It seems like I've seen this before, somewhere. I just can't place my finger on it. Perhaps there are some films that I could recite at the top of my head, but I'm not going to go into detail and comparing these films with Cam. What can I say? I'm curious about it. Hey, it's on Netflix, so if you have a subscription, and who doesn't, I'll check it out. I won't be checking it out anytime soon, just with that eerie feeling that this film does have that sense of familiarity. Nevertheless, I'm intrigued. I want to know what this character is going through, and especially want to validate my conclusions that it is a psychological trauma and or multiple personality disorder, as I've stated based on the poster alone. The concept of using social media, and in this case webcamming, is a growing trend in horror cinema. The internet, social media, this is the new boogeyman. This is the new unknown that lurks in our nightmares, or so it seems. Until filmmakers get tired of this and are ready to move on to the next trend that reflects our social landscape, I won't be too surprised if we see another film such as Cam. Thank you for tuning in to DecayMag Podcast, Season 9, Episode 3. Once again, I'm your host, Ken Artuz, founder for DecayMag. And I must stress, we are DecayMag, not DK Magazine, the letters DK, or the word DK. And you can find us across social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, at DecayMag. But most importantly, do visit our website, DecayMag.com. Our podcast is available across all major podcast platforms: Google Music, iTunes / Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We also have the audio portion of the podcast available on YouTube, where you could find all the timestamps and you could jump through any particular topic as you so please. Thank you for listening. Till next time.